Wizard. The Life and Times of Nikola Tesla. Biography of a Genius. By Mark J. Cypher. Narrated by Simon Preble. Copyright 1996 by Mark J. Cypher. This unabridged audiobook is published by arrangement with Mark J. Cypher, care of John W. White Literary Agency, and was produced in the year 2011 by Tantor Media Incorporated, which holds the copyright thereto. Forward. Nikola Tesla was my father's uncle, and as such he was treated by our family much as any uncle might have been who lived at a considerable distance and was advanced in years. But there were stronger bonds between my father and Tesla than might otherwise have been the case. They came from identical social backgrounds, sons of Serbian Orthodox priests, born and raised a few miles apart in the Austro-Hungarian military frontier district county of Lika in the province of Croatia. My grandmother was Tesla's sister, Angelina. They were the only members of a relatively limited extended family to emigrate to America, and they were the only members to undertake science and technology as their life's work. My father, Nicholas J. John Terbo, Nikola Yovo Teberyevich, was 30 years younger than his uncle, came to America 30 years after him, and died 30 years after Tesla. Tesla was already famous as my father was growing up, and he became a model for my father's technical career. Father held about 175 U.S. and foreign patents, the most important of which was his 1923 basic patent of the hypoid gear, used on the vast majority of the world's cars since 1930. The hypoid gear introduced advanced mathematics to the art of gear design, much as Tesla's work united electrical theory and electrical engineering. Tesla henceforth proudly referred to my father as my nephew, the mathematician. That these patents brought considerable financial as well as professional recognition to my father was also not lost on the often cash-poor Tesla. Because the ethnic and professional similarities between Nikola Tesla and my father were so striking, I feel that I've been granted a special privilege through this comparison in understanding Tesla's private personality, including his well-developed sense of humor and his often cavalier disregard for money. Once, when Tesla was visiting us in the early 1930s, my father took him to lunch at the Book Cadillac Hotel, then the finest in Detroit. They arrived late, only a few minutes before a cover charge of $2 or $3 would end. This was equivalent to $20 or $30 by today's standards. My father suggested waiting, but Tesla would hear none of it. They sat down amid a flurry of waiters, and Tesla ordered a chafing dish, bread and milk, and proceeded to prepare his own lunch to his own specifications, to my father's amusement and the unease of the maitre d'. I had not yet reached 13 when Tesla died in January 1943, and I did not have the sense of the ending of an epoch marked by his passing both for our family and for an era of individualism in scientific discovery. I may have reflected with some uneasiness that I had had the opportunity to meet Tesla some 3 or 4 years earlier, and that no further meetings would ever happen again. I remembered my reluctance to be dragged to the meeting in his suite at the Hotel New Yorker when my mother and I were spending a few days in New York before returning to Detroit after our summer vacation at the Jersey Shore. I would have preferred spending more time at Radio City Music Hall or at the docks watching the ocean liners. I was shy, rather overwhelmed, and spoke hardly a word to this very tall, very gaunt old man. I would have been repelled, as any young all-American boy should have been, to be hugged and kissed by this stranger, if my father hadn't often done the same. This is the way my mother's women friends often acted, but my American mother's brother would have only given me a firm handshake. Little did I realize that Tesla's hugging, kissing, and patting my head would belie his famous idiosyncrasy of an overriding phobia of germs. Surely a young boy would have been teeming with germs. One could therefore speculate that this idiosyncrasy was possibly an affectation designed to preserve his space. While Tesla lived, some considerable degree of his fame endured, in no small measure because of his ability to stimulate the media. However, after his death, the nation and the world were occupied with other more pressing matters: war and reconstruction, international political realignments, an unmatched explosion of new technology, a new consumer society, and Tesla's fame and recognition nearly evaporated. Only a few in the U.S. and international scientific communities, and the abiding respect and admiration of Serbs and all Yugoslavs worldwide, kept his name alive. My awareness of a resurgence of interest in the life and works of Nikola Tesla began in the early 1970s, when I moved from Los Angeles, where it seemed no one had ever heard of Tesla, to Washington, D.C., where at least the name was recognized. In February 1975, my mother phoned to tell me that she had read in the Los Angeles Times that Uncle Nikola was to be inducted into the National Inventors Hall of Fame, and that I should look into it. I chanced to notice on a local TV news program that evening a short segment monitoring the Hall of Fame and an interview with a girl of 10 or 12 who had invented a new can opener, or some such. I dismissed the hall as a commercial promotion and went on to something else. Only later did I read a newspaper account about the induction of Tesla, along with Orville and Wilbur Wright, Samuel F.B. Morse, and Tesla's nemesis, Guglielmo Marconi, and citing the Hall's sponsorship by the U.S. Department of Commerce's Patent and Trademark Office. The closest living relative of each honoree was to receive the induction diploma at an elaborate ceremony. Lacking any Tesla, or even any Terboyevich, to represent the family, an officer of the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, IEEE, accepted the Tesla diploma. The IEEE considers Tesla one of the 12 apostles of electrical science and continues to offer an annual prize in the field of power engineering in his name. When I presented myself at the Patent Office a few weeks later, they were delighted and made arrangements to make a second presentation to me at the 1976 awards ceremony held that year at Congress Hall in Philadelphia as part of the U.S. Bicentennial Year celebration. Since then, there has been an earnest revival of interest in the technological accomplishments of Nikola Tesla and in his personality, philosophy, and culture as well. Part of the drama of his life is that he was a man who not only revolutionized the generation and distribution of electrical energy and made basic contributions to many other facets of modern technology, but that he did so without the specific aim of amassing great wealth. This altruism, which is often criticized as poor business sense, imposed a monetary limitation on future experimentation to test his new innovations. Who knows what advances might have been possible if he had been able to validate them through rigorous experimentation. New science is an expensive endeavor, and finding financial support is a frustrating task for even those as focused as Tesla. Among the associations that have supported the Tesla Renaissance are the Tesla Memorial Society, which I helped found in 1979, and of which I am pleased to be its honorary chairman and chairman of its executive board, and the International Tesla Society, founded in 1983, and of which I am a life member. It was while speaking at the first ITS biannual Tesla Symposium in 1984 that I first met a fellow speaker, Dr. Mark J. Cypher, in person. His paper, The Lost Wizard, was the seed from which his new Tesla biography has sprung. I have been impressed with Dr. Cypher's dedication and scholarship in developing his early theories into a well-rounded examination of the mystery of Tesla's great genius. One of the things that has most intrigued me about a new work on this topic is how much new information keeps surfacing. Dr. Cypher has researched minor characters in Tesla's life as well as the many major ones. This has given him additional insight into Tesla's life and allowed the development of new and different interpretations of many important events, such as the failure of the Wardenclyffe Tower project. Dr. Cypher provides a new look at Tesla's college years, a time when many of his epochal ideas were forming. He's uncovered new information on Tesla's relationship with a number of key individuals, such as his editor, Thomas Comerford Martin, and financial backers John Jacob Astor and John Hayes Hammond. A great strength of Wizard is its adherence, chapter by chapter, to a rather strict chronology, which makes it easy to follow the breadth and scope of Tesla's life and achievements in an orderly fashion. I congratulate Dr. Cypher on a decade's journey with Nikola Tesla, and am pleased to introduce to you Wizard. William H. Turbo, Honorary Chairman, Tesla Memorial Society. Preface. In 1976, while involved in research at the New York Public Library, I stumbled upon a strange text entitled Return of the Dove, which claimed that there was a man not born of this planet who landed as a baby in the mountains of Croatia in 1856. Raised by Earth parents, an avatar had arrived for the sole purpose of inaugurating the new age. By providing humans with a veritable cornucopia of inventions, he had created, in essence, the technological backbone of the modern era. His name was Nikola Tesla, and his inventions included the induction motor, the electrical power distribution system, fluorescent and neon lights, wireless communication, remote control, and robotics. Tesla? Who's he? I said to myself, because my father had been a TV repairman for several years in the early 1950s, and I had spent part of my childhood accompanying him on his house calls, helping put up antennas, test and buy radio tubes, play with oscilloscopes, and watch him build TVs. I was amazed that I had never heard of this man. I remember vividly an event from my grade school years on Long Island that prepared me for my latter-day interest. It was a Saturday, circa 1959, and I was working on a Boy Scout assignment when I came upon a design for a crystal radio set. My father and I gathered a glass jar and a set of headphones, a crystal detector for changing the ambient AC radio waves into audio DC pulses, some thin copper wire to be wrapped around the jar, a metal switch that was scraped across this coil for the dial, a small plank to hold the contraption together, and 100 feet of normal rubber-coated wire for the antenna, which we strung out a second-story window. There was no plug. All energy was derived from the broadcast signals from the nearby radio stations. However, after hooking it all together, the reception was faint. I became discouraged. My father paced the room considering the problem, muttering, "Something's wrong." After a few moments of deep thought, he made a motion which said, "I've got it." Walking over to our radiator and dragging another wire which he had hooked up to the jar, Dad attached a ground connection. Suddenly, all the stations began to come in loud and clear, and I marked each of them on the jar along the coil. It was apparent to me then that electrical power was being transmitted from these stations by wireless means, and that the Earth somehow was intrinsically linked to this system. And now, here I was, nearly 20 years later, 2 years out of graduate school with a master's degree, well-read and somewhat knowledgeable about electronics, yet I had never heard of the principal inventor of the very device I had spent endless hours with as a kid. This astonished me in a way difficult to describe. Moreover, when I asked my father about Tesla, he barely knew of him. Because I believe in seeking original sources, I began to research Tesla's life, starting with the 2 existing biographies, John O'Neill's classic Prodigal Genius, and Inez Hunt and Juanetta Draper's Lightning in His Hand. Soon after, I began tracking down numerous turn-of-the-century references, and also the weighty Nikola Tesla lectures, patents, articles produced by the Tesla Museum in Belgrade, Yugoslavia. Thus I was able to ascertain, by following his actual patents, that indeed Tesla existed, and that his work was fundamental to all these creations. That Tesla's name was so little known puzzled me. So in 1980, 3 years after writing my first article on him, I began a doctoral dissertation on his life. My major purpose was to address the question of name obscurity. During the writing of my dissertation, several notable Tesla works were compiled. These included the comprehensive and encyclopedic Dr. Nikola Tesla Bibliography by Leland Anderson and John Ratzlaff, Tesla's 1919 autobiography, republished by Hart Brothers, Margaret Cheney's biography Tesla, Man Out of Time, 2 compendiums of Tesla's writing by John Ratzlaff, Colorado Springs notes produced by the Tesla Museum, and most recently Leland Anderson's edition of Tesla's private testimony to his lawyers on the history of wireless communication. Even with all this new material, however, no comprehensive, all-embracing treatise had been achieved. In fact, after studying all these texts, a number of contradictions and glaring mysteries remained. These included not only Tesla's obscure early years, tenure at college, and relationship to such key people as Thomas Edison, Guglielmo Marconi, George Westinghouse, and J.P. Morgan, but also the worth of Tesla's accomplishments and his exact place in the development of these inventions. This book attempts to solve the mysteries. Because there have been significant gaps in the record, a clear chronology of Tesla's life is presented. Also addressed are such issues as why his name dropped into obscurity after being a page-one subject in newspapers around the world at the turn of the century, why he never received the Nobel Prize, even though he was nominated for one, what Tesla did during the World Wars, and whether his plan for transmitting electrical power by wireless was feasible. Using a psycho-historical perspective, the text discusses not only those factors that led to Tesla's genius, but also quirks that led to his undoing. In this vein, it delineates Tesla's relationship to many of his well-known associates, such as John Jacob Astor, T.C. Martin, J.P. Morgan, Sr. and Jr., John Hayes Hammond, Sr. and Jr., Michael Pupin, Stanford White, Mark Twain, Rudyard Kipling, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, George Sylvester Viereck, Titus de Bobula, and J. Edgar Hoover. Many of these people are barely touched upon or are not discussed at all in other treatises. Because Tesla's life is so controversial and complex, I also examine such questions as whether Tesla received impulses from outer space, why he ultimately failed in his partnership with J.P. Morgan in constructing a multifunctional global wireless system for distributing power and information, what his exact relationship to Robert and Katherine Johnson was, and what exactly happened to his particle beam weaponry system and secret papers. Since I've based the text largely on first-hand documents rather than on the existing biographies, this book offers an essentially new view of Tesla's life. The most recent biography, Tesla, by Tad Wise, an admittedly fictionalized version of the inventor's life, was not referred to herein, as the goal of the enclosed is to separate out the myth and uncover who Tesla really was. However, one of Wise's most prominent stories, that Tesla was responsible for the peculiar explosion that devastated Tunguska, Siberia, in June of 1908, is addressed in a new appendix for this second edition. I have visited all major Tesla archival centers, such as at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., Columbia University in New York City, and the Tesla Museum in Belgrade, Yugoslavia. And because I've also utilized the Freedom of Information Act and accessed the arcane network of Tesla's researchers, I've been able to compile hundreds of documents that have never been discussed before by any Tesla biographies. In addition, because I'm a handwriting analyst, I've also utilized that expertise to analyze a number of the key personalities involved. Through this means, and as a total surprise, I've also been able to discover a heretofore unreported emotional collapse that the inventor suffered in 1906 at the time of the failing of his great wireless enterprise. Since Tesla lived until the age of 86, the story spans nearly a century. Revered as a demigod by some in the New Age community, Tesla has at the same time been relegated to virtual non-person status by influential segments of the corporate and academic communities. Often billed as a wizard from another world who drew thunderbolts from the skies, Tesla himself helped support the supernatural persona by comparing himself to the Almighty and by frequently grabbing headlines with his sensational talk of interplanetary communication. Because his accomplishments are prodigious, fundamental, and documented, the elimination of his name from many history books is not forgivable. Only by understanding why this occurred can we, as a modern people, hope to rectify the historical record for future generations. Curiously, the further away we've moved from Tesla's death, the more material on his life has come to the fore. In particular, we must thank John O'Neill, the Tesla Memorial Society, the Tesla Museum in Belgrade, and the International Tesla Society, ITS, for this occurrence, and the many Tesla researchers who've written so much about him of late and have participated in the various ITS conferences held every other year since 1984 at the site of some of his most spectacular experiments in Colorado Springs. Because Tesla's eye was always on the future, it seems appropriate to conclude this introduction with the opening lines from his autobiography. They are as true today, as we enter the 21st century, as they were 3 generations ago when they were written. The progressive development of man is vitally dependent on invention. It is the most important product of his creative brain. Its ultimate purpose is the complete mastery of mind over the material world, the harnessing of the forces of nature to human needs. This is the difficult task of the inventor, who is often misunderstood and unrewarded. But he finds ample compensation in the pleasing exercises of his powers, and in the knowledge of being one of that exceptionally privileged class without whom the race would have long ago perished in the bitter struggle against pitiless elements. Speaking for myself, I have already had more than my full measure of this exquisite enjoyment, so much that for many years my life was little short of continuous rapture. 1. Heritage. Hardly is there a nation which has met with a sadder fate than the Servians. From the height of its splendor, when the empire embraced almost the entire northern part of the Balkan Peninsula and a large portion of what is now Austria, the Servian nation was plunged into abject slavery after the fateful battle of 1389 at the Kosovo Polje against the overwhelming Asian hordes. Europe can never repay the great debt it owes to the Servians for checking, by the sacrifice of its own liberty, that barbarian influx. Nikola Tesla. It was during a crackling summer storm in Smiljan, a small hamlet at the back edge of a plateau set high in the mountains, when Nikola Tesla was born. The Serbian family resided in the province of Lika, a plateau and gentle river valley in Croatia, where wild boar and deer still dwell, and farmers still travel on ox-drawn wagons. Only a cart ride from the Adriatic, the land is well protected from invasion by sea by the Velebit Ridge to the west, which runs the length of the province and towers over the coastline as a steep cliff, and by the Dinaric Alps to the east, a chain of mountains that emerge from Austria, span the Balkan Peninsula, and culminate in the south as the Isle of Crete. Though hidden, Smiljan was centrally located, 15 miles east of the tiny seaport of Karlobag, 6 miles west of the bustling town of Gospic, and 45 miles southwest of the cascading wonder known as Plitvice Lakes, an interlinking chasm of caves and streams and magnificent waterfalls that lie at the base of the Dinaric chain. In the early 1800s, having been briefly part of Napoleon's Illyrian provinces, Croatia was now a domain of Austria-Hungary. With its neighboring Slavic countries of Bosnia, Herzegovina, Montenegro, Serbia, and Slovenia, Croatia was sandwiched between the ruling Habsburg dynasty to the north and the Ottoman Empire to the south. In ancient times, and for many centuries, much of the coastline along the Adriatic was ruled by the Illyrians, a piratical tribe believed to have descended from regions around Austria. Successfully protecting their borders from such rulers as Alexander the Great, many Illyrians rose into social prominence, Some at the time of Christ became emperors. Slavs, travelling in close-knit clans known as sadrugas, were first recognized by the Byzantines in the 2nd century AD in the areas around what is now Belgrade. Tesla's appearance resembled the characteristic features of the Gegs, a tribe described as being tall and having convex-shaped noses and flat skulls. Like other Slavs, these people were originally pagans and worshipped nature spirits and a god of thunder and lightning. Tesla's early ancestors were probably born in the Ukraine. They most likely travelled down through Romania into Serbia and lived near Belgrade along the Danube. After the Battle of Kosovo in the latter part of the 14th century, they crossed the Kosovo plains into Montenegro and continued their migration northward into Croatia in the latter part of the 18th century. All Slavs speak the same language. The major distinction between Croats and Serbs stems from the differences in the histories of their respective countries. The Croats adopted the Pope as their spiritual leader and followed the Roman form of Catholicism. The Serbs adopted a Byzantine patriarch and the Greek Orthodox view. Whereas Roman priests remain celibate, Greek Orthodox priests may marry. In the east and central regions, Slavs were more successful in maintaining their own control over what came to be called the Kingdom of Serbia. Whereas in the west, in Croatia, outside rulers such as Charlemagne in AD 800 occupied the region. While Croatia maintained the Christianization policies of the Franks, the Serbs and Bulgarians drove out the papacy and revived their own pagan faith, which included animal sacrifice and pantheism. Many of the ancient pagan gods were made saints and were celebrated in higher esteem than Jesus. Tesla's patron saint Nicholas was a 4th century god who protected sailors. To further alienate the two groups, although speaking the same verbal language, Croats adopted the Latin alphabet, whereas Serbs and Bulgarians took on the Cyrillic alphabet used by the Greek Orthodox Church. Before Turkish rule, from the 9th century until the 1300s, Serbia had maintained autonomy. For Serbia, this period was its golden age, as the Byzantines accepted its autonomous status. Due to the philanthropic nature of its kings, a dynamic medieval art flourished, and great monasteries were erected. Croatia, on the other hand, was in much more turmoil. Influenced by Western Europe, the ruling class attempted unsuccessfully to institute a feudal system of lords and serfs. This policy directly opposed the inherent structure of the democratic Zadrugas, and so Croatia was never able to establish a unified identity. Nevertheless, one independent offshoot of Croatia, Ragusa, Dubrovnik, which had established itself as a port of commerce and a rival of Venice as a major sea power, became a melting pot for South Slavic culture and a symbol for the Aurelian ideal of a unified Yugoslavia. The identity of Serbia as a nation, however, changed for all time on June the 15th, 1389, the day 30,000 Turks obliterated the Serbian nation in the Battle of Kosovo. Cruel conquerors, the Turks destroyed Serbian churches or converted them to mosques. Drafting the healthiest male children into their armies, they skewered and tortured the men and forced the women to convert and marry Turks. Many Serbs fled, taking up residence in the craggy mountains of Montenegro or the hidden valleys of Croatia. Some of those that remained became wealthy as Turkish vassals. Others, mostly of mixed blood, became pariahs. The Battle of Kosovo is as important to the Serbs as the Exodus to the Jews or the crucifixion to the Christians. It is commemorated every year on the anniversary of the tragedy as Vidov Dan, the day when we shall see. As one Serb told the author, it follows us always. The massacre and ensuing defilement of the kingdom became the dominant motif of the great epic poems which served to unify the identity of the Serbian people through their centuries of hardship. Unlike the Croats, who didn't have this kind of all-embracing exigency, the Serbs had Kosovo. Combined with their adherence to the Greek Orthodox religion in a twofold way, Serbs, no matter where they lived, felt united. The century of Tesla's birth was marked by the rise of Napoleon. In 1809, the emperor wrested Croatia from Austro-Hungarian rule and established French occupation. Extending his domain down the Adriatic coast, Napoleon reunited the Illyrian provinces and introduced French libertarian ideals. This philosophy helped dismantle the outmoded feudal system of lords and serfs and reawaken the idea of a unified Balkan nation. At the same time, the occupation created an identity with the French culture. Tesla's paternal grandfather and maternal great-grandfather both served under the French emperor. With support from the Russians, Serbian bands united in 1804 under the leadership of the flamboyant hog farmer George Petrović, known as Kara George, in Turkish Black George, a man of Montenegrin heritage trained in the Austrian army. However, in 1811, Napoleon invaded Russia. Thus support for Serbia evaporated. 40,000 Turks marched against the Serbs, levelling towns and butchering citizens. Serbs were often executed by impalement, their writhing bodies lined up along the roads to the city. All males captured above the age of 15 were slaughtered, and women and children were sold as slaves. Kara George fled the country. Miloš, the new Serbian leader, was a sly and treacherous character, able to walk a thin line between Serbs and the Sultan. In 1817, when Kara George returned, he was decapitated, his head sent by Miloš to Istanbul. A tyrant as terrible as any Turkish pasha, Miloš became the official head of Serbia in 1830. One of the more sapient figures of the day was the scholar and Serb Vuk Karadžić, 1787 to 1864. Schooled in Vienna and St. Petersburg, Vuk believed all Yugoslavs were one. Pleading with Miloš to build schools and to form a constitution, Vuk created with the student a Serbo-Croatian dictionary that combined the two written languages. He published the epic folk ballads which gained the attention of Goethe, and through this means the Serbian plight and also its unique literature were translated and spread to the Western world. In Croatia, the land of Tesla's birth, Emperor Ferdinand of Austria, in 1843, issued a proclamation forbidding any discussion about Illyrianism, thereby helping keep the Serbs and Croats a separate people. In 1867, the Austro-Hungarian dual monarchy was created, and Croatia became a semi-autonomous province of the new empire. Simultaneously, in Serbia, Mikhail Obrenović was finally able to secure the departure of the Turkish garrisons from Belgrade and convert the state into a constitutional monarchy. Tesla's background was thus a mixture of crossed influences, a monastic environment, a Byzantine legacy of a once great culture, and incessant battles against barbarous invaders. As a Serb growing up in Croatia, Tesla inherited a rich mix of tribal rituals, egalitarian rule, a modified form of Greek Orthodox Catholicism, pantheistic beliefs, and myriad superstitions. Women cloaked their bodies in black garb, and men packed a cross in one pocket and a weapon in another. Living at the edge of civilization, Serbs saw themselves as protectors of Europe from the Asian hordes. They bore that responsibility with their blood for many centuries. 2. Childhood, 1856 to 74. Now I must tell you of a strange experience which bore fruit in my later life. We had a cold snap drier than ever observed before. People walking in the snow left a luminous trail. As I stroked Marjak's back, it became a sheet of light, and my hand produced a shower of sparks. My father remarked, "This is nothing but electricity, the same thing you see on the trees in a storm." My mother seemed alarmed. "Stop playing with the cat," she said. "He might start a fire." I was thinking abstractly. Is nature a cat? If so, who strokes its back? It can only be God, I concluded. I cannot exaggerate the effect of this marvelous sight on my childish imagination. Day after day I asked myself "What is electricity?" and found no answer. 80 years have gone by since, and I still ask the same question, unable to answer it. Nikola Tesla. Nikola Tesla descended from a well-established frontier Zadruga whose original family name had been Draganic. By the mid-1700s, the clan had migrated to Croatia, and the Tesla name arose. It was a trade name like smith or carpenter, which described a woodworking axe that had a broad cutting blade at right angles to the handle. Supposedly, the Teslas gained the name because their teeth resembled this instrument. The inventor's grandfather, also named Nikola Tesla, was born about 1789 and became a sergeant in Napoleon's Illyrian army during the years 1809 to 13. Like other Serbs living in Croatia, Nikola Tesla, the elder, was honored by fighting for an emperor who sought to unify the Balkan states and overthrow the oppressive regime of the Austro-Hungarians. He came from a region known as the military frontier, which stretched from the Adriatic Sea to the plains of the Danube, including the province of Lika, where the inventor was born. This so-called corpus separatum in the Habsburg monarchy had its own military administration, different from the rest of the country, and therefore they were not subjects of the feudal lord. Mostly Serbs, these people were warriors whose responsibility was to protect the territory from the Turks, and in return, unlike the Croats, Serbs were able to own their own land. Shortly after Napoleon's defeat at Waterloo in 1815, Nikola Tesla married Anna Kalinic, the daughter of a prominent officer. After the collapse of Illyria, the grandfather moved to Gospic, where he and his wife could raise a family in a civilized environment. On February 3, 1819, Milutin Tesla, the inventor's father, was born. One of 5 children, Milutin was educated in a German elementary school, the only one available in Gospic. Like his brother Josip, Milutin tried to follow in his father's footsteps. In his late teens he enrolled in an Austro-Hungarian military academy, but rebelled against the trivialities of regimented life. He was hypersensitive and dropped out after an officer criticized him for not keeping his brass buttons polished. Whereas Josip became an officer and later a professor of mathematics, first in Gospic and then at a military academy in Austria. Milutin became politically active, wrote poetry, and entered the priesthood. Influenced by the philosopher Vuk Karadžić, Milutin promulgated the Yugoslav idea in editorials published in the local newspapers under the nom de plume Serbin Pravičić, man of justice. Tesla wrote that his father's style of writing was much admired, penning sentences full of wit and satire. He called for social equality among peoples, the need for compulsory education for children, and the creation of Serbian schools in Croatia. Through these articles, Milutin attracted the attention of the intellectual elite. In 1847, he married Dajuka Mandić, a daughter from one of the more prominent Serbian families. Dajuka's maternal grandfather was Toma Budisavljević, 1777 to 1840, a regal, white-bearded priest who was decorated with the French Medal of Honor by Napoleon himself in 1811 for providing leadership during the French occupation of Croatia. Sorka Budisavljević, one of Toma's 7 children, followed the family tradition by marrying a Serbian minister, Nikola Mandić, who himself came from a distinguished clerical and military family. Their daughter, Dajuka, who was born in 1821, was Tesla's mother. Eldest daughter of 8 children, Dajuka's duties increased rapidly, for her mother was stricken with failing eyesight and eventually became blind. "My mother was a truly great woman of rare skill and courage," Tesla wrote. Probably due to the magnitude of her responsibilities, which included at age 16 preparing for burial the bodies of an entire family stricken with cholera, Dajuka never learned to read. Instead, she memorized the great epic Serbian poems and also long passages of the Bible. Tesla could trace his lineage to a segment of the educated aristocracy of the Serbian community. On both sides of the family, and for generations, there could be found clerical and military leaders, many of whom achieved multiple doctorates. One of Jajuka's brothers, Pajo Mandic, was a field marshal in the Imperial Austro-Hungarian army. Another Mandic ran an Austrian military academy. Peter Mandic, a third brother and later favourite uncle of Nikola's, met with tragedy as a young man when his wife passed away. In 1850, Peter entered the Gormirje monastery, where he rose in the clerical hierarchy to become the regional bishop of Bosnia. In 1848, through the help of the Mandic name, Milutin Tesla obtained a parish at Senje, a northern coastal fortress located just 75 miles from the Italian port of Trieste. From the stone church, situated high on austere cliffs, Milutin and his new bride could overlook the blue-green Adriatic Sea and the mountainous islands of Kyrk, Thres, and Raab. For 8 years the Teslas lived in Senje, where they sired their first 3 children. Dane, born in 1849, the first son, and 2 daughters, Angelina, born the following year, who would later become the grandmother to the current honorary head of the Tesla Memorial Society, William Terbo, and Milka, who followed 2 years later. As with her other 2 sisters, and like her mother, Milka would eventually marry a Serbian Orthodox priest. The Yuka was proud of her son Dane, who used to sit with the fishermen on the shore and bring back stories of great adventure. Like his younger brother, who was yet to be born, Dane was endowed with extraordinary powers of eidetic imagery. Due to a profound sermon on the subject of labour, as a result of which Milutin was awarded a special red sash by the Archbishop, the minister was promoted to a congregation of 40 homes in the pastoral farming village of Smiljan, situated only 6 miles from Gospic. Milutin was returning home, where his father still lived. In 1855, the young minister, his pregnant wife, and his 3 children packed their ox cart and made the 50-mile journey over the Velebit Ridge through the Lika Valley to their new dwelling. In 1856, Nikola Tesla was born. He was followed 3 years later by Marica, mother-to-be of Sava Kasanovic, the first Yugoslavian ambassador to the United States, and the man most responsible for creating the Tesla Museum in Belgrade. Smiljan was an ideal setting for the young boys to grow up in. Nikola, raised in large measure by his 2 older sisters, appears to have led an Arcadian childhood, annoying the servants, playing with the local birds and animals on the farm, and learning inventions from his older brother and mother. Down to the local creek the boys would go to swim or catch frogs in the spring or summer, and to build dams in the autumn and early winter, in vain attempts to stop the seasonal flooding of the land. One of their favourite recreations was a smooth water wheel, a device which contained inherent concepts that would later form the basis of Tesla's innovative bladeless steam turbines. Other inventions included a cornstalk pop gun, which contained principles that Tesla later adapted when he fashioned particle beam weapons, a special fishing hook for catching frogs, snares for capturing birds, and a parasol used in an unsuccessful attempt to glide off the roof of the barn. Young Nico must have taken quite a leap, because his fall laid him up for 6 weeks. Perhaps the boy's most ingenious creation was a propeller driven by 16 maybugs glued or sewn 4 abreast onto the wooden blades. These creatures were remarkably efficient, for once they were started, they had no sense to stop, and continued whirling for hours and hours. All went well until a strange boy came to the place. He was the son of a retired officer in the Austrian army. That urchin ate maybugs alive, and enjoyed them as though they were the finest blue-point oysters. That disgusting sight terminated my endeavours in this promising field, and I have never since been able to touch a maybug or any other insect for that matter. Some of the inventor's earliest memories, when he was 3, were recalled when he was an octogenarian. Many years before pigeons, Tesla showered his affections on the family cat Majak. The fountain of my enjoyment. I wish that I could give you an adequate idea of the depth of affection which existed between me and him. After dinner, Nico and his cat would rush out of the house and frolic by the church. Majak would grab me by the trousers. He tried hard to make me believe he would bite, but the instant his needle-sharp incisors penetrated the clothing, The pressure ceased, and their contact with my skin was as gentle and tender as that of a butterfly alighting on a petal. Tesla liked best to wallow in the grass with Marshak. We would just roll and roll in a delirium of delight. In this peaceful setting, young Nico was introduced to the barnyard animals. I would take one or the other under my arm and hug and pet it, he wrote, especially the grand resplendent cock who liked me. It was also at this time that the boy began to study flight, a topic of interest that caused him in later life to invent a variety of novel flying machines. His relationship with birds, however, was filled with contradictions. My childhood would have passed blissfully if I did not have a powerful enemy. Our gander, a monstrous ugly brute with the neck of an ostrich, mouth of crocodile, and a pair of cunning eyes radiating intelligence and understanding like the human. One summer day my mother had given me a bath and put me out for a sun-warming in Adam's attire. When she stepped in the house, the gander espied me and charged. The brute knew where it would hurt most, and seized me by the nape, almost pulling out the remnant of my umbilical cord. My mother, who came in time to prevent further injury, said to me, "You must know that you cannot make peace with a gander or a cock whom you have taunted. They will fight you as long as they live." Tesla had run-ins with other animals as well, such as a local wolf, who fortunately turned and ran from him, the family cow, which Tesla rode and one time fell off of, and the giant ravens, whom he claimed to have snared with his bare hands by hiding under the bushes and leaping out at them as a cat would. Tesla also liked to tell the story of his two homely aunts, who often visited his home. One, an Aunt Veva, had two protruding teeth like the tusks of an elephant. She loved me passionately, and buried them deep in my cheek in kissing me. I cried out from pain, but she thought it was from pleasure, and dug them in still deeper. Nevertheless, Tesla recalled, I preferred her to the other, as she used to glue her lips to mine and suck until by frantic efforts I managed to free myself, gasping for breath. One day, when they came over, and Tesla was still small enough to be held in the arms of his mother, they asked me who was the prettier of the two. After examining their faces intently, I answered thoughtfully, pointing to one of them, "This here is not as ugly as the other." Tesla inherited his sense of humor from his father, who, for instance, once cautioned a cross-eyed employee who was chopping wood near the minister and his son, "For God's sake, do not strike at what you're looking at, but what you expect to hit." Father Tesla was known to talk to himself and even carry on conversations with different tones in his voice, a trait also noted in the inventor, especially in his later years. Milutin also trained his sons in exercises in developing memory and their intuitive faculties. Able to recite at length works in several languages, he often remarked playfully that if some of the classics were lost, he could restore them. My father spoke fluently a great many languages, and also ranked high as a mathematician. He was an omnivorous reader, and possessed a large library, from which it was my privilege to gather a great deal of information during my years of life spent at home. Texts from this library included works in German by Goethe and Schiller, encyclopedic works in French by d'Alembert, and other classics, probably in English, from the 18th and 19th centuries. The inventor's colourful autobiography remains the primary source of information on his childhood. Although Dane and his parents appeared prominently in the work, Tesla's sisters are barely mentioned. Certainly he loved the girls. He exchanged letters with them regularly for the duration of his life, but they seem not to have overtly influenced his upbringing. It was his mother, whose untiring work habits and proclivity toward invention influenced the inventor-to-be. Whereas Milutin ran the parish and published his articles, the Yucca directed the servants and ran the farm. She had the responsibility of growing the crops, sewing all the clothes, and designing needlework, a practice that made her famous in the region. Tesla also ascribes his proclivity to invention to his mother. She conceived of many household appliances, including churns, looms, and all kinds of kitchen tools. My mother descended from a long line of inventors. Starting before dawn, she did not quit work until 11 o'clock at night. In 1863, disaster struck the Tesla household. Dane, who was gifted to an extraordinary degree, was out riding the family horse, which was of Arabian breed, possessed of almost human intelligence. The horse may have been the type easily spooked. The previous winter it had thrown Milutin in the middle of the forest after an encounter with wolves, and had run home, leaving him unconscious. The horse, however, was smart enough to bring the search party back to the scene of the accident, and thus the father was saved. This animal, which was cared for and petted by the whole family, threw the brother as well, but Dane died of the injuries. The family never really recovered. Dane's premature death left my parents disconsolate. The recollection of his attainments made every effort of mine seem dull in comparison. Anything I did that was creditable merely caused my parents to feel their loss more keenly, so I grew up with little confidence in myself. Upset by his brother's death and the rejection by his parents, particularly his mother, the 7-year-old ran away from home and hid in an inaccessible mountain chapel, which was visited only once a year. By the time he had reached the place, it was nightfall. There was little the boy could do but force his way in and spend the night entombed. It was an awful experience. Shortly after this tragedy, Milutin was promoted and given the parish at the ornate onion bulb church in the town of Gospic. The family moved the few miles to Gospic, where Father Tesla also took a post teaching religion at the local gymnasium, high school. Niko was of school age, so he began his formal education at this time. However, he had great difficulty adjusting to city life, for he missed the farm and the idyllic existence he had once enjoyed. This change of residence was like a calamity to me. It almost broke my heart to part from our pigeons, chickens, and sheep, and our magnificent flock of geese, which used to rise to the clouds in the morning and return from the feeding grounds at sundown in battle formation, so perfect that it would have put a squadron of the best aviators of the present day to shame. The boy would wake up in the middle of the night with nightmares of Dane's death, which he claimed to have witnessed, and of the funeral, which probably involved an open casket. A vivid picture of the scene would thrust itself before my eyes and persist despite all efforts to banish it. To free myself of these tormenting appearances, I tried to concentrate my mind on something else, by continuously conjuring up new images. I was oppressed by thoughts of pain in life and death and religious fear, swayed by superstitious beliefs, and lived in constant dread of the spirit of evil, of ghosts and ogres and other unholy monsters of the dark. It was at this time that Tesla began to have what today are known as out-of-body experiences, although he never ascribed anything mystical or paranormal to them. Blurred at first, I would see on my journeys new places, cities and countries, live there, meet people and make friendships. And however unbelievable, it is a fact that they were just as dear to me as those in actual life, and not a bit less intense in their manifestations. Tesla stated he had such great powers of eidetic imagery that he sometimes needed one of his sisters to help him tell which was hallucination and which was not. Like Dane, his thoughts were often interrupted with annoying flashes of light. These psycho-neurological disturbances continued throughout his life. On the positive side, the problem was also attributed to his inventive bent. He could use his powers of visualization to mold his various creations, and even run and modify them in his mind before committing them to paper and the material world. While still in grade school, Niko had obtained a post at the local library in Gospic, classifying the various books. But he was forbidden to read at night, for fear that his eyes would be strained in dim light, and Milutin would fly into a rage to stop him. Undeterred, Niko would swipe some household candles, seal up the cracks in his room, and continue reading through the night. The book that Tesla claimed changed his life was Biography, a a story translated into Serbian about the son of Aba by the Hungarian author Josica. Up to the age of 8, my character was weak and vacillating. This work somehow awakened my dormant powers of will, and I began to practice self-control. At first my resolution faded like snow in April, but in a little while I conquered my weakness and felt a pleasure I never knew before, that of doing as I willed. Thus, by the age of 12, he was successfully experimenting with acts of self-denial and self-mastery, a paradoxical pattern which played itself out repeatedly throughout his life. Simultaneously, Tesla began to develop peculiarities, probably stemming from the stress associated with his brother's death, strained relationships with his parents, and denial of his sexual desires. At this time, he became ill and claimed that a heavy dose of Mark Twain's writings turned his spirit and cured him. 25 years later, when I met Mr. Clements and we formed a friendship, I told him of the experience and was amazed to see that a great man of laughter burst into tears. During this period, I contracted many strange habits. I had a violent aversion against the earrings of women, but other ornaments, such as bracelets, pleased me. The sight of a pearl would almost give me a fit, but I was fascinated with the glitter of objects with sharp edges. I would not touch the hair of other people, except perhaps at the point of a revolver. I would get a fever by looking at a peach. Even now, at age 61, I am not insensible to some of these upsetting impulses. The youngster, however, also undertook normal boyhood adventures, including a few near-death experiences. On one occasion, by falling headlong into a huge kettle of boiling milk just drawn from the paternal herds. On another occasion, nearly drowning after swimming under a raft. And on a third occasion, by nearly being swept over a waterfall at one of the nearby dams. These were rather unpleasant experiences, but not as bad, according to the inventor, as the following. There was a wealthy lady in town who used to come to the church gorgeously painted up and attired with an enormous train and attendants. One Sunday I had just finished ringing the bell in the belfry and rushed downstairs when this grande dame was sweeping out, and I jumped on her train and tore it. Livid, my father gave me a gentle slap on the cheek, the only corporal punishment he ever administered to me, but I almost feel it now. Nico became ostracized and avoided social interaction. Fortunately, he was able to redeem himself through his inventive mind. One day the local firemen brought out their new engine and started a fire to demonstrate it. To the embarrassment of the officials, the hose, which drew its water from the local river, would not work. Intuitively, Tesla realized there was a kink in the rigging. Tearing off his Sunday best, he dived into the water, unscrambled the line, and became the hero of the day. This event became a strong inducement for the boy to continue his interest in invention. Simultaneously, this act symbolized a new way to obtain love and admiration, not only from his parents, but also from society. Between the ages 10 and 14, Nico attended the Real Gymnasium, equivalent to junior high school. It appears that both his father and uncle taught there. It was a fairly new institution with a well-equipped physics department. I was interested in electricity almost from the beginning of my educational career, he wrote. I read all that I could find on the subject, and experimented with batteries and induction coils. Tesla also began experimenting with water turbines and motors that utilized power derived from differentials in air pressure. His goal, though unobtainable due to a flaw in his logic, was a perpetual motion machine that would work by maintaining a steady-state vacuum and harnessing, like a windmill, the rush of incoming air. This movement, he hoped, would turn a generator endlessly. After seeing a drawing or photograph of Niagara Falls, Tesla announced to his uncle Josip that one day he would place a gigantic wheel under the falls and thereby harness it. Most likely he also visited the magnificent network of waterfalls at Plitvice Lakes for additional inspiration, as they were only a day's journey away. In 1870, at the age of 14, Nico moved from Gospic to Karlovac, Karlstadt, where he saw a locomotive for the first time, to attend the higher Real Gymnasium located by a swamp on a tributary to the Sava River near Zagreb. The youth lived with his aunt Stanka, his father's sister, and her husband, Colonel Brankovic, an old warhorse. During his stay at Karlovac, he frequently visited his cousin, Miliko Zoric, at the family estate in Tomingaj. Niko, who would often go there for vacations, found it to be a sort of sanctuary. At Karlovac, he was trained in languages and mathematics. His most influential professor was Martin Sekulic, a physics teacher who demonstrated the principles by apparatus of his own invention. It was a freely rotatable bulb with tinfoil coatings, which was made to spin rapidly when connected to a static machine. It is impossible for me to convey an adequate idea of the intensity of feeling I experienced in witnessing his exhibitions of these mysterious phenomena. Every impression produced 1,000 echoes in my mind. Through hard work, Tesla condensed the 4 years of schooling into 3, and began to plan a way to approach his father with his controversial decision not to enter the ministry, but to study engineering instead. "It is not humans that I love, but humanity," he tried to tell his father. During his last year at Karlovac, after a day of exploration by a nearby marsh, he caught a fever which he said was malaria. The seriousness of his condition may have been exacerbated by an inadequate diet. "I was fed by my aunt like a canary bird. When the colonel would put something substantial on my plate, she would snatch it away and say excitedly to him, 'Be careful, Niko is very delicate.' I had a voracious appetite and suffered like Tantalus, but I lived in an atmosphere of refinement and artistic taste quite unusual for those times and conditions." Upon graduation, Tesla received notice from his father that he should go on a hunting expedition, as there was an epidemic in town. The youth returned to Gospic anyway. The streets were stacked with corpses, the atmosphere thick with smoke, for the people mistakenly thought that cholera was being transmitted through the air rather than by drinking water. Partly due to his weakened condition from his earlier illness, Tesla quickly became a victim. Bedridden for 9 months, he nearly died. In one of the sinking spells, which was thought to be the last, my father rushed into the room. "Perhaps," I said, "I may get well if you will let me study engineering." "You will go to the best technical institution in the world," he solemnly replied, and I knew that he meant it. The Teslas settled on the Polytechnic School at Graz, Austria, located 170 miles to the north. First, however, the boy would have to serve 3 years in the army. With a major war breaking out against the Turks, Milutin directed his son to pack his gear and go into the hills to avoid the draft. There the youth could maintain a low profile and at the same time recover his health. For most of this term I roamed in the mountains, loaded with a hunter's outfit and a bundle of books, and this contact with nature made me stronger in body as well as in mind. But my knowledge of principles was very limited. Misguided inventions of this period included a submarine tube able to convey letters and packages across the seas, and a ring around the equator, for transporting people from one end of the globe to the other. One day, while playing with snowballs on the side of a mountain, however, Tesla discovered the concept of hidden trigger mechanisms able to unleash great reservoirs of energy. One found just the right conditions. It rolled until it was a large ball, and then spread out, rolling up the snow at the sides as if it were a giant carpet, and then suddenly it turned into an avalanche, stripping the mountainside clear of snow, trees, soil, and everything else it could carry with it. But contact with war was unavoidable, and on occasion the youth chanced upon its ravages. 25 years later he would recall, "I have seen men hung, beaten to death, shot, quartered, stuck on a pointed stick, heads chopped off, and children on a bayonet like quails en broche at Delmonico's." Fortunately, Tesla avoided capture, and in 1875 he returned to Gospic. With a new fellowship from the Military Frontier Authority, he began school in Austria the following semester. 3. College years 1875 to 82. It has cost me years of thought to arrive at certain results, by many believed to be unattainable, for which there are now numerous claimants, and the number of these is rapidly increasing, like that of the colonels in the South after the war. Nikola Tesla. 80 miles south of Vienna, in the capital of the province of Styria, was the Polytechnic School in Graz. Milutin had chosen the school because it was one of the most advanced of the region. The physicist and philosopher Ernst Mach had taught there a few years earlier, as had the psychophysiologist Gustav Theodor Fechner. Planning on becoming a professor, Tesla undertook courses in arithmetic and geometry from Professor Rogner, a lecturer known for his histrionics. Theoretical and experimental physics with the punctilious German Professor Purcell, and integral calculus with Professor Alle. Alle was the most brilliant lecturer to whom I ever listened. He took a special interest in my progress, and would frequently remain for an hour or two in the lecture room, giving me problems to solve in which I delighted. Other courses taken included analytical chemistry, mineralogy, machinery construction, botany, wave theory, optics, French, and English. To save money, he roomed with Kosta Kulisic, whom he had met at the Student Society of Serbia. Kulisic later became a professor of philosophy in Belgrade. Tesla plunged into his work with great intensity. Studying upwards of 20 hours a day, he changed his major to engineering and extended his curriculum to study other languages. He could speak about 9 of them, and the works of such writers as Descartes, Goethe, Spencer, and Shakespeare, many of which he knew entirely by heart. "I had a veritable mania for finishing whatever I began," he recalled, reflecting on his next self-appointed assignment. The collected works of Voltaire comprised 100 large volumes in small print, which that monster had written while drinking 72 cups of black coffee per diem. This task cured him of the compulsion, but did not serve to quell the pattern of relentless self-denial and self-determination. Because he was praised by his teachers, the other students became jealous, but at first Tesla remained unperturbed. Returning home the following summer, having passed his freshman year with all A+, the young scholar expected to be praised by his parents. Instead, his father tried to persuade his son to stay in Gospic. Unbeknown to Tesla, the teachers had written Milutin, warning that the boy was at risk of injuring his health by obsessively long and intense hours of study. A rift was created between father and son, perhaps in part because the Military Frontier Authority had been abolished and the scholarship was no longer available. Reacting to the ridicule from other students who resented Tesla for his monastic study habits and close association with the faculty, Tesla took up gambling. He began to stay late at the Botanical Garden, the students' favorite coffee house, playing cards, billiards, and chess, attracting a large crowd to watch his skillful performances. Tesla's father led an exemplary life and could not excuse the senseless waste of time and money. "I can stop whenever I please," he told his father, "but is it worthwhile to give up that which I would purchase with the joys of paradise?" During his sophomore year, a direct current Gram dynamo was delivered from Paris to Professor Purcell's physics class. It was equipped with the customary commutator, a device that transferred the current from the generator to the motor. Electricity in its natural state is alternating. This means that its direction of flow changes rapidly. An analogous situation would be a river that flowed downstream, then upstream, then downstream, and so on many times per second. One can see the difficulty in harnessing such a river with, for instance, a water wheel, for the wheel would constantly change its direction as well. The commutator is comprised of a series of wire brushes that serve to transfer the electricity into only one direction of flow, that is, a direct current, DC. It is a cumbersome device and sparks considerably. When Professor Purcell displayed this up-to-date equipment, Tesla intuitively deduced that the commutator was unnecessary, and that alternating current, AC, could be harnessed unencumbered. He voiced this opinion, which appeared utterly fantastic at the time. Herschel devoted the rest of the lecture to a detailed explanation of how this goal was impossible. Driving the point home, Herschel embarrassed his student by disconnecting the superfluous commutator and noting with feigned surprise that the generator no longer worked. "Mr. Tesla may do many things, but this he cannot accomplish. His plan is simply a perpetual motion scheme." Tesla would spend the next 4 years obsessed with proving the professor wrong. Another invention Tesla worked on at the same time, but under the tutelage of Professor Allais, was that of a mechanical flying machine. As a child, Tesla had heard stories from his grandfather about Napoleon's employment of hot air balloons, which were used to observe enemy troop movements and for dropping bombs. No doubt he had also studied the principles involved in school, and quite possibly saw such futuristic creations floating in the Austrian skies when he went off to college. By his 3rd year, Tesla was running into difficulties at school. Having surpassed his classmates in his studies, he became bored and frustrated by his inability to find a solution to his AC problem. He began to gamble more heavily, sometimes 24 hours at a stretch. Although Tesla tended to return his winnings to heavy losers, reciprocation did not occur, and one semester he lost his entire allowance, including the money for tuition. His father was fuming, but his mother came to him with a roll of bills and said, "Go and enjoy yourself. The sooner you lose all we possess, the better it will be. I know that you will get over it." The audacious youth won back his initial losses and returned the balance to his family. "I conquered my passion then and there," he wrote, "and tore it from my heart so as not to leave a trace of desire. Ever since that time I have been as indifferent to any form of gambling as to picking teeth." This statement appeared to be an exaggeration, as Tesla gambled quite freely with his future and was known to play billiards when he came to the United States. An Edison employee recalled, "He played a beautiful game. Tesla was not a high scorer, but his cushion shots displayed skill equal to that of a professional exponent of this art." It has also been suggested that years later, in the early 1890s, Tesla bilked some of the wealthy socialites in New York by feigning minimal ability in the sport. Exam time came, and Tesla was unprepared. He asked for an extension to study, but was denied. He never graduated from the Austrian Polytechnic School and did not receive any grades for his last semester there. Most likely he was discharged, in part for gambling and supposedly womanizing. According to his roommate, Tesla's cousins, who had been sending him money, therefore withdrew their aid. Fearing that his parents would find out, Tesla disappeared without word. Friends searched everywhere for him and decided that he had drowned in the river. Clandestinely packing his gear, Tesla traveled south over the border into Slovenia, where he arrived in Maribor in late spring of 1878 to look for work. He played cards with the local man on the streets, as is still the custom today, and soon gained employment with an engineer, earning 60 florins a month. But the job was short-lived. Tesla continued traveling, making his way through Zagreb to the small coastal village of Mingag. He would not return home, for he didn't want to confront his parents. At the same time, however, Tesla also continued his quest for a solution to the problem of removing the commutator from the DC generator. His cousin, Dr. Nikola Tesla, recalled the story he had heard as a boy growing up in Yugoslavia in the 1920s. "My mother told us he would always like to be alone when Tesla visited us. In the morning he would go off into the woods and meditate. He would measure one tree to another, making notes, experimenting stringing wires between them and transmitting current. Peasants passing by would be astonished at such an erratic person. They would approach and say, 'We're sorry, your cousin seems to be crazy.'" Having finally located his son, after word from Kulishish, who had seen Tesla in Maribor, Milutin travelled north to discuss his academic problems. Tesla refused to return to Graz, so Milutin offered a solution. His son would make a fresh start at another university. They returned to Gospic. Re-accepted into the family, Tesla began once again to attend church to hear his father's sermons. There he met Anna. She was tall and beautiful, with extraordinary understandable eyes. For the first and only time in his life, Tesla would say, "I fell in love." Delighting in her company, Nikola would take Anna for strolls by the river, or back to Smiljan, where they would talk about the future. He wanted to become an electrical engineer. She wanted to raise a family. The following year, Milutin passed away, and a few months later, in 1880, Tesla left for Bohemia, now in the Czech Republic, to carry out my father's wish and continue my education. He promised to write to Anna, but their romance was doomed, and she would marry shortly thereafter. Tesla enrolled in the Charles Ferdinand branch of the University of Prague, one of the foremost institutions in Europe, for the summer term. According to Ernst Mach, who a decade earlier had transferred from Graz to be appointed Rector Magnificus, Prague was a city rich in talented people, with street signs often appearing in half a dozen languages. Although the city was filled with majestic buildings, sanitary conditions were severely lacking. To avoid typhoid fever, one had to boil water or obtain mineral water from springs to the north. Just 2 years after Tesla's stay, Harvard psychologist William James would come to visit to meet with Mach and Mach's arch-rival Karl Stumpf, ordinary professor of philosophy. Stumpf was a student of the controversial ex-priest Franz Brentano, who also influenced another pupil, Sigmund Freud, and was also Tesla's philosophy teacher. Other courses Tesla undertook included analytical geometry with Heinrich Dürer, experimental physics with Karol Domalip, both ordinary professors, and higher mathematics with Anton Puszta, who was an extraordinary professor from the German Technical University, also in Prague. With Stumpf, Tesla studied Scottish philosopher David Hume. Raised as a child prodigy of music, the acerbic and sharp-nosed Stumpf opposed a number of key psychophysicists, including the famed Wilhelm Wundt, as well as Mach. But at the same time, he also helped shape the thinking of a number of key students, such as phenomenologist Edmund Husserl and Gestalt psychologist Wolfgang Kohler. A persuasive advocate of Hume's radical skepticism, Stumpf argued for the concept of the tabula rasa. Basing his thinking on Aristotle and John Locke, both of whom repudiated the concept of innate ideas, Stumpf stated that the human mind was born a blank state, a tabula rasa. Impinging on it after birth were all of the primary quality of things, that is, true knowledge about the world. Through the sense organs, Tesla learned the brain mechanically recorded incoming data. The mind, according to Hume, was nothing more than a simple compilation of cause and effect sensations. What we call ideas were secondary impressions derived from these primary sensations. The will and even the soul were reduced by Hume to impressions and associations of impressions. At this time, Tesla also studied the theories of Descartes, who envisioned animals, including man, as simply automata incapable of actions other than those characteristic of a machine. This line of thinking would dominate Tesla's worldview and would, ironically, serve as the template for a mechanistic paradigm that would lead the inventor to discover his most original creations, even though the whole idea of original discovery appears to be antithetical to this extrinsically motivated Aristotelian premise. According to Tesla, and to this view, all of his discoveries were derived from the outside world. Although Tesla does not overtly refer to Stumpf's perceived adversary, in retrospect it appears obvious that Stumpf's opposition did not stop Tesla from studying Mach's experiments in wave mechanics. Born in Moravia, now the Czech Republic, in 1838, Mach graduated from the University of Vienna in 1860. By 1864, he was a full professor at Graz, and by 1867 he was head of the Department of Experimental Physics at Prague, with 4 books and 62 articles to his credit. Influenced by the research in psychophysics of Fechner in Graz and Ludwig von Helmholtz in Berlin, Mach studied the workings of the human eye along with his Prague colleague, famed physiologist and philosopher Jan Pourquinier. Both the eye and the ear collected information from the outside world, analyzed it and transferred it via electrical impulses in the nerves to the respective processing centers in the brain. This traditional line of research had been taken by many other well-known scientists, including Isaac Newton, Johann von Goethe, and Herbert Spencer, all favorites of Tesla's. In his laboratory, Mark had constructed a famous instrument known as a wave machine. This device could make progressive and standing longitudinal and transverse waves. Mark could display a number of mechanical effects with these acoustic waves and demonstrate the analogy between acoustic and electromagnetic events. By this means, the mechanical theory of the ether could also be demonstrated. By studying acoustical wave motion in association with mechanical, electrical, and optical phenomena, Mark discovered that when the speed of sound was achieved, the nature of an airflow over an object changed dramatically. This threshold value became known as Mach 1. Mark also wrote on the structure of the ether and hypothesized that it was inherently linked to a gravitational attraction between all masses in the universe. Influenced overtly by Buddhist writings, which no doubt filtered down to esoteric discussions by the university students, Mark could hypothesize that no event in the universe was separate from any other. The inertia of a system is reduced to a functional relationship between the system and the rest of the universe. This viewpoint was extended to the relationship of mental events to exterior influences. Like Stumpf, he agreed that every mental event had to have a corresponding physical action. Since Mark's writings so closely paralleled Tesla's later research and philosophical outlook, Mark seems a curious omission from Tesla's published writings. By the time Tesla left the university at the end of the term, he had made great strides, both theoretical and practical, in solving the AC dilemma. "It was in that city," Tesla said, "that I made a decided advance, which consisted in detaching the commutator from the machine and studying the phenomena in this new aspect." With the death of his father, he needed to earn his own living. He began an apprenticeship in teaching, but did not enjoy it. Uncle Pajo suggested that he move to Hungary, where employment could be obtained through a military friend, Ferenc Puskás, who ran the new American telephone exchange with his brother Tivadar. In January 1881, Tesla moved to Budapest, but he found to his dismay that the operation had not yet been launched. The Puskás brothers were very busy men, running operations in St. Petersburg and overseeing in Paris Thomas Edison's incandescent lamp exhibit at the Paris Exposition and fixing the lighting system at the Opera House there. Out of funds and without a job, Tesla approached the engineering department at the Central Telegraph Office of the Hungarian government and talked his way into a position as a draftsman and designer. Working for a subsistence salary, he utilized what little surplus funds he had to purchase equipment to further his experiments. Antony Szigeti, a former classmate and engineer from Hungary, with the body of Apollo and a big head with a lump on the side that gave him a startling appearance, became Tesla's friend and confidant. Many a night when the budding inventor was not enmeshed in his research, the two fellows would meet at the local cafes where they would discuss the events of the day, or compete in such friendly games as determining who could drink the most milk. On one such occasion, Tesla claimed he was beaten after the 38th bottle. Due to his meagre funds and general inability to budget himself, Tesla had but one suit, which had withered from use. It was the time of a religious festival, and Szigeti inquired what Tesla would be wearing. Stuck for an answer, the youthful inventor came upon the clever idea of turning his suit inside out, planning thereby to show up with a seemingly new set of clothes. All night was spent tailoring and ironing. But when one starts with a wrong premise, no amount of patching can right the problem. The outfit looked ridiculous, and Tesla stayed home instead. In a few months, the American telephone exchange opened there in Budapest, and Tesla and Szigeti immediately gained employment. The new enterprise allowed the young engineers to finally learn firsthand how the most modern inventions of the day operated. It was also the first time that Tesla was introduced to the work of Thomas Edison, the Napoleon of invention, whose improvements on Bell's telephone helped revolutionize the field of communications. Up the poles Tesla would climb to check the lines and repair equipment. On the ground he worked as a mechanic and mathematician. There he studied the principle of induction, whereby a mass with an electric or electromagnetic charge can provide a corresponding charge or force or magnetism in a second mass without contact. He also studied a number of Edison's inventions, such as his multiplex telegraph, which allowed 4 Morse-coded messages to be sent in 2 directions simultaneously, and his new induction-triggered carbon disc speaker, the flat, circular, easily removable device which is still found in the mouthpiece of every telephone today. As was his nature, Tesla took apart the various instruments and conceived ways of improving them. By giving the carbon disc a conical shape, he fashioned an amplifier which repeated and boosted transmission signals. Tesla had invented a precursor of the loudspeaker. He never bothered to obtain a patent on it. Except for friendly diversion with Ziggity, Tesla's every spare moment was spent reworking the problem of eliminating the commutator in DC machines and harnessing AC without cumbersome intermediaries. Although a solution seemed imminent, the answer would not be revealed. Hundreds of hours were spent building and rebuilding equipment and discussing his ideas with his friend. He pored over his calculations and reviewed the work of others. Tesla later wrote, "With me it was a sacred vow, a question of life or death. I knew that I would perish if I failed." Monomaniacal in pursuit of his goal, he gave up sleep or rest of any kind, straining every fibre to prove once and for all that he was right and Professor Purcell and the rest of the world were wrong. His body and brain finally gave out, and he suffered a severe nervous collapse, experiencing an illness that surpasses all belief. Claiming that his pulse raced at 250 beats per minute, his body twitched and quivered incessantly. I could hear the ticking of a watch 3 rooms away. A fly alighting on a table would cause a dull thud in my ear. A carriage passing at a distance fairly shook my whole body. I had to support my bed on rubber cushions to get any rest at all. The sun's rays, when periodically intercepted, would cause blows of such force on my brain that they would stun me. In the dark, I had the sense of a bat and could detect the presence of an object by a peculiar, creepy sensation on the forehead. A respected doctor pronounced his malady unique and incurable. Desperately clinging to life, Tesla was not expected to recover. Tesla attributes his revival to a powerful desire to live and to continue the work, and to the assistance of the athletic Ziggity, who forced him outdoors and got him to undertake healthful exercises. Mystics attributed the event to the triggering of his pineal gland and corresponding access to higher mystical states of consciousness. During a walk in the park with Ziggity at sunset, the solution to the problem suddenly became manifest as he was reciting a glorious passage from Goethe's Faust. "See how the setting sun with ruddy glow the green embosomed hamlet fires. He sinks and fades, the day is lived and gone. He hastens forth new scenes of life to waken. Oh, for a wing to lift and bear me on, to where his last rays beckon." As I uttered these inspiring words, Tesla declared, the truth was suddenly revealed. I drew with a stick on the sand the diagrams shown 6 years later in my address before the American Institute of Electrical Engineers. Pygmalion, seeing his statue come to life, could not have been more deeply moved. 1,000 secrets of nature which I might have stumbled upon accidentally, I would have given for that one which I had wrestled from her against all odds and at the peril of my existence. Tesla emphasized that his conceptualization involved new principles rather than refinements of pre-existing work. The AC creation came to be known as the rotating magnetic field. Simply stated, Tesla utilized 2 circuits instead of the customary single circuit to transmit electrical energy, and thus generated dual currents 90 degrees out of phase with each other. The net effect was that a receiving magnet, or motor armature, by means of induction, would rotate in space and thereby continually attract a steady stream of electrons, whether or not the charge was positive or negative. He also worked out the mechanism to explain the effect. In less than 2 months, Tesla wrote, I evolved virtually all the types of motors and modifications of the system now identified with my name. It was a mental state of happiness as complete as I have ever known in my life. Ideas came in an uninterrupted stream, and the only difficulty I had was to hold them fast. Tesla invented at this time not only single-phase motors, whereby the 2 circuits were 90 degrees out of phase with each other, but also polyphase motors, which used 3 or more circuits of the same frequency in various other degrees out of phase with each other. Motors would be run entirely in his mind. Improvements and additions to design were conceived. Finally, plans and mathematical calculations would eventually be transferred to a notebook. This step-by-step procedure would become customary. Ferenc Puskás, who had initially hired Tesla, asked if he wanted to help his brother Tivadar run the new Edison Lighting Company in Paris. Tesla said, I gladly accepted. Szigeti was also offered a position, so Tesla was fortunate to have a good friend with whom he could share the new adventure. Was Tesla the first to conceive of a rotating magnetic field? The answer is no. As far back as 1824, a French astronomer by the name of François Arago experimented with spinning the arm of a magnet by using a copper disc. The first workable rotating magnetic field, similar to Tesla's 1882 revelation, was conceived 3 years before him by Mr. Walter Bailey, who demonstrated the principle before the Physical Society of London on June the 28th, 1879, in a paper entitled A Mode of Producing Arago's Rotations. The invention comprised 2 batteries connected to 2 pairs of electromagnets bolted catty-corner to each other in an X pattern, with a commutator used as a switching device. The rotating magnetic field was initiated and maintained by manually cranking the commutator. On this occasion, Bailey stated, the disc can be made to rotate by means of intermittent rotation of the field affected by means of electromagnets. 2 years later, at the Paris Exposition of 1881, came the work of Marcel Dupré, who calculated that a rotating magnetic field could be produced without the aid of a commutator by energizing electromagnets with 2 out-of-step AC currents. However, Dupré's invention, which won an award at the electrical show, had a major problem. One of the currents was furnished by the machine itself. Furthermore, the invention was never practically demonstrated. Other researchers who conceived of a rotating magnetic field analogous to Tesla's but after his revelation in early 1882 were Professor Galileo Ferraris of Turin, Italy, 1885–88, and an American engineer, Charles Bradley, 1887. Ferraris was influenced by the work of Lucien Gaulard and George Gibbs, who designed AC transformers during the mid-1880s. In 1883, they presented their AC system at the Royal Aquarium in London, and in 1885 they installed an AC system of power distribution in Italy, where they met Ferraris. Purchased by George Westinghouse for $50,000, the system was installed in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, the following year by William Stanley, Westinghouse's head engineer. The Gaulard-Gibbs invention, however, did not do away with the commutator, which was the express purpose of Tesla's design. In Ferraris's published treatise on his independent discovery of a rotating magnetic field, he wrote, "This principle cannot be of any commercial importance as a motor." After learning of Tesla's work, Ferraris stated, "Tesla developed it much further than I did." Bradley filed for a patent for an AC polyphase device on May 8, 1887, number 390,439, after 9 Tesla AC patents had been granted. Hasselwander, in the same year, utilized slip rings in place of commutators on DC Thomson-Houston equipment, and also designed 2- and 3-phase windings on DC armatures. The question of priority concerning Tesla's invention was discussed by Sylvanus P. Thomson, a physics professor in London, in his 1897 comprehensive text on AC motors. Thomson, no relationship to Elihu Thomson, considered at the time to be perhaps the best-known writer on electrical subjects now living, said that Tesla's work separated itself clearly from predecessors and contemporaries in his discovery of a new method of electrical transmission of power. A question that remains unanswered was whether or not Tesla knew of Bailey's work. It is quite possible that he had read Bailey's paper, although no one at the time, including Bailey, comprehended the importance of the research or understood how to turn it into a practical invention. Tesla stated in the early 1890s, "I am aware that it is not new to produce the rotations of a motor by intermittently changing the poles of one of its elements. In such cases, however, I imply true alternating currents, and my invention consists in the discovery of the mode or method of utilizing such currents." A few years later, in a well-publicized case involving patent priorities on what came to be known as the Tesla alternating current polyphase system, Judge Townsend of the U.S. Circuit Court of Connecticut noted that before Tesla's invention and lecture to the American Institute of Electrical Engineers, AIEE, in 1888, there had been no AC motors. Furthermore, no one attending the lecture recognized any priorities. Whereas Bailey had dealt with impractical abstractions, Tesla had created a workable product which initiated a revolution in the art. The Tesla patents were also sustained against individual cases involving Charles Bradley, Messrs. Cabaneus and Dimenil, William Stanley, and Elihu Thomson. In citing a previous case on a similar issue, Judge Townsend responded to what today is called the doctrine of obviousness. The apparent simplicity of a new device often leads an inexperienced person to think that it would have occurred to anyone familiar with the subject, but the decisive answer is that with dozens and perhaps hundreds of others laboring in the same field, it had never occurred to anyone before. Potter versus Krieger, 155 U.S. 597. Bailey and the others, e.g. Bradley, Ferraris, Stanley, did not discover the Tesla invention. They were discussing electric light machines with commutators. Eminent electricians united in the view that by reason of reversals of direction and rapidity of alternations, an alternating current motor was impracticable, and the future belonged to the commutated continuous current. It remained for the genius of Tesla to transform the toy of Arago into an engine of power. The discovery of how to effectively harness the rotating magnetic field was really only a fraction of Tesla's creation. Before his invention, electricity could be pumped approximately 1 mile, and then only for illuminating dwellings. After Tesla, electrical power could be transmitted hundreds of miles, and then not only for lighting, but for running household appliances and industrial machines in factories. Tesla's creation was a leap ahead in a rapidly advancing technological revolution. 4. Tesla meets the Wizard of Menlo Park, 1882–85. Oh, he's a great talker, and say he's a great eater, too. I remember the first time I saw him. We were doing some experimenting in a little place outside Paris, and one day a long, lanky lad came in and said he wanted a job. We put him to work, thinking he would soon tire of his new occupation, for we were putting in 20 to 24 hours a day then. But he stuck right to it, and after things eased up, one of my men said to him, "Well, Tesla, you've worked pretty hard. Now I'm going to take you into Paris and give you a splendid supper." So I took him to the most expensive cafe in Paris, a place where they broil an extra thick steak between 2 thin steaks. Tesla stowed away one of those big fellows without any trouble, and my man said to him, "Anything else, my boy?" "I'm standing treat." "Well, if you don't mind, sir," said my apprentice, "I'll try another steak." After he left me, he went into other lines and has accomplished quite a little. Thomas Edison. Taking the advice of Ferenc Puskás, Tesla left Budapest for Paris in April 1882, delighted with the chance to meet the Edison people from America and ready to build his motor and to find investors. Concurrently, he was getting paid for the experience. Paris in the 1880s was a center of modern fashion. Men in their cutaway coats and silk top hats, women with braided hair, in long frilled dresses with bustles, and wealthy tourists ready to take back the latest fineries to their respective nations. Tesla was met by Ferenczi's brother Tivadar Puskás, a hard driver, but also a man known to talk in air balloons. Tesla, whose head could also soar into the clouds, had met a powerful ally. Mindful of the need for secrecy, they discussed strategies for approaching Charles Batchelor, manager of the newly formed Compagnie Continental Edison, with Tesla's new motor as the young inventor was introduced to operations. Formerly a resident of Manchester, England, Batchelor, a master mechanic, had been sent to America a decade earlier to present innovative thread-making machinery recently created by his employers, the Coates Thread Company. There he met Edison, and shortly became his most trusted associate. Batchelor worked on the first phonographs and on perfecting the filament for the light bulb. He also ran operations in New Jersey and then in Europe, owning a 10% share of Edison's many worldwide companies. An open-minded individual, Batchelor was approachable, although also rather busy. Anthony Szigeti probably emigrated from Budapest at the same time as Tesla, since both were hired by Puskás and were together almost constantly in Paris. Szigeti wrote, "Tesla was very much excited over the ideas which he then had of operating motors. He talked with me many times about them and told me his plan of constructing and operating motors and dispensing with the commutator." Having just purchased a large factory at Ivry-sur-Seine for the construction of generators and manufacture of light bulbs, Batchelor, as Edison's closest partner, was planning on erecting central lighting stations throughout Europe. He also had plans in England, where the Crystal Palace Exposition was then displaying Edison's new incandescent lamp. Batchelor would need good men to run the concerns, and wrote Edison frequently as to the expertise of the various workers. He was particularly impressed with Puskás, who had successfully run the Edison lighting exhibit at the Paris Exposition of 1881. "Puskás is the only worker having any idea of push," he wrote, "and I think that you should insist on him becoming a partner." Within 6 months, Edison Continental would be producing lamps superior to those from America. The company would erect central stations in most of the major cities of Europe for indoor lighting, and also administer the large outdoor arc lamps which were being used to illuminate the urban streets. Tesla, who was working at Ivry-sur-Seine, would be trained with the other workers to travel out and help run these facilities. I never can forget the deep impression that magic city produced on my mind. For several days after my arrival, I roamed through the streets in utter bewilderment of the new spectacle. The attractions were many and irresistible, but alas, the income was spent as soon as received. When Mr. Puskás asked me how I was getting along, I replied, "The last 29 days of the month are the toughest." In the mornings before work, Tesla would arise at 5 a.m. to swim 27 laps at a bathhouse on the Seine, and in the evening he would play billiards with the workers and discuss his new AC invention. One of them, Mr. D. Cunningham, foreman of the mechanical department, offered to form a stock company. The proposal seemed to me comical in the extreme. I did not have the faintest conception of what that meant, except that it was the American way of doing things. T.C. Martin writes, "In fact, but for the solicitations of a few friends in commercial circles who urged him to form a company to exploit the invention, Mr. Tesla, then a youth of little worldly experience, would have sought an immediate opportunity to publish his ideas, believing them to be a radical advance in electrical theory, as well as destined to have a profound influence on all dynamo-electric machinery." In his spare time, and as was his custom, Tesla wrote out the specifications and mathematics of his AC invention in a notebook, and worked on alternative designs for his flying machine. He probably sought out financial backers, for he received an invitation to go on a shooting expedition from a prominent French manufacturer. Perhaps the inventor had not totally recovered from the strange illness he had almost succumbed to in Budapest, for after his outing he suffered the sensation that my brain had caught fire. I saw a light as though a small sun was located in it, and I passed the whole night applying cold compresses to my tortured head. Writing this passage almost 40 years later, Tesla claimed that these luminous phenomena still manifest themselves from time to time, as when a new idea opening up possibilities strikes me. In the summer he worked on the lighting at the Opera House in Paris, or went to Bavaria to help in the wiring of a theatre, and in the autumn he may have helped in the laying of underground cables for the new central station going up in Paris, or travelled to Berlin to install incandescent lighting at the cafes. At the end of the year, Tesla submitted to one of the administrators of the company, Mr. Rao, a plan for improving their dynamos, and was given an opportunity. Louis Rao, who was director of the Compagnie Continental Edison in Rue Montchamp, and had his beautiful home lit with the Edison system, allowed Tesla to implement his modernization plan. Shortly thereafter, the young inventor's automatic regulators were completed and accepted gratefully. Tesla was probably hoping to be compensated for his new contributions, but he was sent to work in Strasbourg before financial compensation was awarded. In January 1883, Batchelor shipped 1,200 lamps to the Strasbourg plant, located at the railroad station, and within 3 months Tesla arrived to oversee the operations. There he would stay for the next 12 months. Batchelor had been urging Edison to test the generators coming from America for at least 2 or 3 days with a full load, as fires from faulty armatures and poor insulation were becoming too common. The powerhouse at Strasbourg in particular had been subject to this type of problem. Since all our plants are differently constructed, it would take well-trained and creative engineers to run things smoothly. Batchelor demonstrated confidence in Tesla's abilities by sending him to Strasbourg. However, he seems not to have mentioned Tesla in his correspondence with Edison. In any event, Tesla's account of the situation in Strasbourg corroborates Batchelor's. The wiring was defective, and on the occasion of the opening ceremonies, a large part of a wall was blown out through a short circuit right in the presence of old Emperor Wilhelm I. The German government refused to take the plant, and the French company was facing a serious loss. On account of my knowledge of the German language and past experience, I was entrusted with the difficult task of straightening out matters. Having anticipated a long stay in the region, Tesla had brought with him from Paris materials for his first AC motor. As soon as he was able, Tesla constructed the motor in secret in a closet in a mechanical shop opposite the railroad station. However, summer would arrive before this first machine was in operation. Anthony Seghetti, his assistant, forged an iron disc, which Tesla mounted on a needle, having surrounded it, in part, with a coil. "Finally," Tesla wrote, "I had the satisfaction of seeing rotation affected by alternating currents of different phase and without sliding contacts or commutator, as I had conceived a year before. It was an exquisite pleasure, but not to compare with the delirium of joy following the first revelation." Tesla presented his new creation to his friend Mr. Bauzin, the mayor of the town, who tried his best to interest wealthy investors. But to my mortification, there was no response. Upon his return to Paris, he sought promised compensation for achieving a difficult success in Strasbourg. Approaching his employers, after several days of circulus vicious, it dawned on me that my reward was a castle in Spain. Mr. Batchelor pressed me to go to America with a view of redesigning the Edison machines. I determined to try my fortunes in the land of golden promise. John O'Neill, Tesla's first major biographer, has suggested that Batchelor wrote a note of introduction to Edison which read, "I know 2 great men, and you are one of them. The other is this young man." Evidence for the veracity of this oft-repeated tale is lacking. Batchelor, for instance, had been back in America for at least 3 months prior to Tesla's arrival. Thus, he would not have had to write a letter. Furthermore, there is evidence that Edison had already met Tesla in Paris during a little-known sojourn he took to look over his European operations at that time. O'Neill also refers to Batchelor incorrectly as Edison's former assistant, when Batchelor was probably Edison's closest lifelong colleague. Edison does, however, substantiate that Tesla worked for me in New York. He was brought over from Paris by Batchelor, my assistant. but there is no reference to Batchelor's appreciation of Tesla's genius. On October the 28th, 1883, fully a year after Tesla began working for Edison Continental while he was stationed in Strasbourg, Batchelor singled out the names of 2 or 3 I can mention as capable as far as their work shows: Mr. Stout, an inspector; Mr. Vizier, my assistant; Mr. Jeffrey, whose plants are always spoken well of. There are others capable, but I think these are the best. Certainly, had Tesla impressed Batchelor as O'Neill contends, he should have been listed in this letter, or in numerous other letters to Edison that I've reviewed. Before Tesla left for America, he spent time with a scientist who was studying microscopic organisms found in common drinking water. Combined with the scare he had had with his bout with cholera a few years earlier, Tesla acquired a phobia which led him to shun unpurified water, scour his plates and utensils before eating, and refrain from frequenting unsavory restaurants. He would later write, "If you would watch only for a few minutes the horrible creatures, hairy and ugly beyond anything you can conceive, tearing each other up with the juices diffusing throughout the water, you would never again drink a drop of unboiled or unsterilized water." In the spring of 1884, with funds for the journey supplied by Uncles Petar and Payo, Tesla packed his gear and caught the next boat for America. Although his ticket and money and some of his luggage were stolen, the young man was not deterred. Resolve, helped by dexterity, won out in the nick of time, and I managed to embark for New York with the remnants of my belongings, some poems and articles I had written, and a package of calculations relating to solutions of an unsolvable integral and to my flying machine. The voyage appears not to have been a happy one. A mutiny of sorts occurred on board, and Tesla was nearly knocked overboard. In 1808, Sir Humphrey Davy created artificial luminescence by running an electric current across a small gap between 2 carbon rods. This simple device evolved into the arc lamp, used in English lighthouses in the 1860s and displayed at the Philadelphia Exposition of 1876 by Moses Farmer. By 1877, numerous investigators were exploring the possibility of placing the incandescent effect within glassed enclosures, because they would be much safer this way for marketing to households, and a race developed between such inventors as Charles Brush, Thomas Edison, Moses Farmer, St. George Lane Fox, Hiram Maxim, William Sawyer, and Joseph Swan. "I saw the thing had not gone so far, but that I had a chance," Edison said, and so he challenged William Wallace, Farmer's partner, to a race as to who would be the first man to create an efficient electric light. Boasting that he would soon light up New York City with 500,000 incandescent lamps, Edison and his business manager, Grosvenor Lowry, were able to secure large amounts of capital from such investors as Henry Villard, owner of the first Trans-American Railroad, and financier J. Pierpont Morgan. In November 1878, after 3 years of research, a hard-drinking telegrapher by the name of William Sawyer and his lawyer partner Albion Mann applied for a patent for an incandescent lamp with carbon rods, filaments, and filled with nitrogen. They proclaimed that they had beaten Edison. Joseph Swan, another competitor, removed the nitrogen and kept the carbon filament, but created a low-resistance lamp. Realizing that the amount of power required to send electricity a few hundred feet was prodigious using the low-resistance design, Edison created in September 1878 a high-resistance vacuum lamp that utilized considerably less power. Together with a revolutionary wiring called a feeder line, his success was further augmented by a new Sprengel pump, which William Crookes had been recommending for the creation of vacuums in glass-enclosed tubes. It would be another 6 months, April 22nd, 1879, before he would file for a patent, but his new design would lower power requirements and thereby cut copper costs 100-fold. The competition was fierce, and Edison's financial backers were running scared. They suggested to Edison that they purchase the Sawyer patents and combine the two companies. Edison had not yet settled on carbon as a filament, and was exhausting his working capital in experimenting with boron, iridium, magnesium, platinum, silicon, and zirconia. At the same time, He had also sent explorers to the Amazon, Bolivia, Japan and Sumatra in search of rare forms of bamboo, which he was also considering. It would not be until 1881 that he finally settled upon a form of carbonized paper. During this time, however, and without Edison's knowledge, Sawyer and Mann approached Lowry. Their lamp was superior to Edison's. It was patented, and it worked. Lowry tried to bring Edison in for a four-way discussion. However, Edison sent an emissary who dared not relay to Edison all Lowry had said. But Edison heard enough to be jolted from his indecision. Cursing and spraying tobacco juice, he exclaimed it was the old story, lack of confidence. Edison was adamant about not joining with Sawyer or Swan or anyone else. He continued rash publicity campaigns which announced a veritable Aladdin's lamp. It is Edison's light, the great inventor's triumph. With the backing of Wall Street moguls, Edison began to illuminate Menlo Park and the private homes of the wealthy in New York City. The first was that of J. Pierpont Morgan at 36th Street and Madison Avenue. The year was 1881. To run the generator, Edison designed a steam engine and a boiler, and placed the power plant under the stable in a newly dug cellar at the back edge of the property. Wires were connected to the new incandescent lights placed in the gas fixtures of the home via a brick-lined tunnel which ran the length of the yard just beneath the surface. Of course, there were frequent short circuits and many breakdowns on part of the generating plant. Even at the best, it was a source of a good deal of trouble for the family and neighbours who complained of the noise of the dynamo. Mrs. James M. Brown, next door, said that its vibrations made her house shake. Morgan had to pile sandbags around the inside of the cellar and place the machinery on heavy rubber pads to deaden the noise and the vibrations. This final experiment restored quiet and brought peace to the neighbourhood until the winter, when all the stray cats in the neighbourhood gathered on this warm strip in great numbers, and their yowlings gave grounds from the neighbours for more complaints. The following year, on September the 4th, 1882, the new Central Station at Pearl Street opened. It provided electric lighting to many Wall Street buildings, including Morgan's office. Tesla's ship dropped anchor in New York in late spring of 1884, just as the monumental decade-long project, the Brooklyn Bridge, was being completed, and the last components of the Statue of Liberty were being hoisted into position. 28 years old, tall and spare, with thin, refined face, and sporting a moustache, Tesla still had the look of an adolescent. His first impression of the New World was that it was uncivilized, 100 years behind the lifestyle of the great European cities. Deferring his planned meeting with Edison one day to look up an old friend, Tesla had the good fortune to pass by a small machine shop in which the foreman was trying to repair an electric machine. He had just given up the task as hopeless. One rendition of the story has Tesla agreeing to fix the machine without a thought for compensation. On a separate occasion, Tesla revealed that it was a machine I had helped design, but I did not tell them that. I asked, "What would you give me if I fix it?" $20 was the reply. I took off my coat and went to work, and had it running perfectly in an hour. The story is important because, depending on the rendition, two different Teslas emerge, one motivated by money and one not. In either case, Tesla was shocked by the rough character of the New World. He proceeded cautiously to Edison's new laboratory, a former ironworks at Gork Street, situated only a few blocks from the central lighting station Edison was constructing at Pearl Street. Batchelor probably met Tesla and introduced him to the inventor. "I was thrilled to the marrow by meeting Edison," Tesla said. Possibly aware of the proximity of Transylvania to Tesla's birthplace and a resurgence of interest in the tales of Vlad Dracula, the 15th-century alleged vampire who lived in the region, Edison inquired whether or not the neophyte had ever tasted human flesh. Aghast at the question and Edison's utter disregard of the most elementary rules of hygiene, Tesla replied in the negative and asked what Edison's diet consisted of. "You mean to make me so all-fired smart?" Tesla nodded. "Why, I eat a daily regimen of Welsh rarebit," Edison replied, It's the only breakfast guaranteed to renew one's mental faculties after the long vigils of toil. Wanting to emulate the Grand Wizard, the neophyte took on the peculiar diet, accepting as true, in spite of a protesting stomach, the jocular suggestion. Tesla's various accounts of this meeting differ markedly, depending on his mood at the time of the telling and his awareness of the size and shape of the audience. For in his autobiography, published in 6 installments of Hugo Gernsback's futuristic magazine Electrical Experimenter, Tesla wrote that the meeting with Edison was a memorable event in my life. I was amazed at this wonderful man who, without early advantages and scientific training, had accomplished so much. I had studied a dozen languages, delved in literature and art, and had spent my best years in libraries, and felt that most of my life had been squandered. It wasn't long before Tesla realized that his academic training and mathematical skills had given him a great engineering advantage over Edison's plodding strategy of trial and error. In a bitter moment of reminiscence at the time of Edison's death in 1931, Tesla said, "If he had a needle to find in a haystack, he would not stop to reason where it was most likely to be, but would proceed at once with the feverish diligence of a bee to examine straw after straw until he found the object of his search. I was almost as